Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Emily will get here whenever she does. I've started the Zoom session and I'm recording it, of course. You should have received an email from me last night with some comments on your resume and cover letter. So do you have any questions about those?
I haven't looked at it yet, but
Aha.
I'll ask you.
Okay, that's fine. I got your response, Cody. So the whole purpose of that is not to be critical, but to help you make this work and make it really powerful. So the suggestions I'm making, if there's something that you really don't like about them, they're suggestions. And what I'm trying to do, obviously, is help you make this, from my standpoint, much better. One of the things I'll be doing this week is finding out who I have available to do the mock interview, which will be done in the last week of class. Meanwhile, this week, besides the discussion about interview questions and the assignment and assessment, I've actually added a second assignment to this week's work, and that is to write an elevator pitch. An elevator pitch is a 30 to 45 second summary of who you are, what are your qualifications, and what are you looking for. Now, your book, when it talks about elevator pitches, wants you to put a question at the end. And what I want to emphasize is that a question at the end of an elevator pitch depends on where you are, the circumstances in which you're giving it. One of the things about an elevator pitch is, we call it an elevator pitch because about 30 seconds is what people have on an elevator to speak. And so what we want to do is think about it in terms of how can we very quickly articulate what it is, who we are, and what we're after, and why we think we're qualified. It's something that you need to practice on family, on friends. We'll give you a chance to practice here in classroom as well. The reason you want to practice it is that you want it to sound absolutely natural. You don't want it to sound like you're just playing a tape. And we all know what that sounds like when somebody's saying something. Years ago, we had when we lived in North Carolina, we had a really, really top flight ophthalmologist. And Bill would be in there and he'd talk to you, and then you'd ask him a question. And his entire demeanor and voice changed as he went through the textbook explanation. He ran a tape. And we were laughing about it. We laughed about it a lot because that's exactly the way he acted. Because he wasn't himself. When he was just talking, it was like friends sitting at the table having a cup of coffee together. But when he went into lecture mode, it was like he flipped a switch and changed personality. So what you want it to be is that talking over a cup of coffee chat, who you are. Now your book says you should close with a question. That works to my mind, certain circumstances only. One of the things I'd like you to do is have your elevator pitch ready to go when you go into your interview. And the reason is somebody says, well, tell me about yourself, or tell me a little about yourself before we get started. That's when you pull it out. And you make it short and sweet. You don't ask a question, because the questions they're suggesting are things like, what's it like to work here? Well, your interviewer is not going to be particularly interested in answering questions like that. However, if you're just meeting someone, and you know, in an interview, sometimes you end up being taken around and introduced to other people. And so you have a chance then to ask that question, you know, how, you know, what do you like about working here? How long have you been here? So be prepared with those, but don't make them a rote part of the elevator pitch, because under certain circumstances, they're just absolutely inappropriate. So bear that in mind. But your assignment is to write that out. I want you to write it out because it gives you a chance to look at it and say to yourself, does that work? And don't be afraid to talk yourself up. You know, we're taught in this society, don't brag, right? And yet people do it all the time. But we're taught that as a way to keep us from doing it constantly. This is not a brag piece, but it is an honest piece. Here's what I want. Here's what my qualifications are. In your case, Sarai, you'd say you were a certified medical assistant and a certified electronic health record specialist, because you have those, or will have. You have one and you'll have the other.
I have both.
Right. You have both now?
Yeah. Sorry.
You will have the other one. That'll be the end of this mod. Yeah. So you say that. Let people know what your qualifications are. Tell them you're experienced with, you know, phlebotomy, because you're doing the 9 Health Fair, right?
I'm not sure.
Ah.
I need to come in for the training.
Oh. Well, I know we're doing it. So yeah, please do.
Is there one today?
I have no idea. Ask Tel. She's the one. She and Nate are doing that, but I think she's mainly doing it. So ask her when you go into class today. And it's funny, although I thought she knew yesterday, she said, I didn't realize that Sarai was in both classes. But ask her. But yes, please, you know, come in and get some practice and do it. That's something that in your interview, and perhaps even in your cover letter, you might say that you've been a student phlebotomist at 9 health fairs. And 2 things go on there. First off, it says that anybody that knows anything about a 9 health fair knows you get a chance to do a lot of sticks. So they know you've had some experience. The other is it says that you participate in the community. And everyone likes to see that in candidates. It often is the edge between 2 otherwise equal candidates. So I would, if you can, please do. But the elevator pitch should be, as I said, 30 seconds, maximally 45. And practice it. I mean, you may feel it's kind of silly standing in front of the mirror practicing your elevator pitch. If you have, most of our smartphones can record it. See how you sound. Do you sound natural? Do you sound like you're just talking with a friend? Do that. If you can practice it with friends and family, please do. Because it does need to come out in a conversational way. Everybody knows that when you're doing that, knows about elevator pitches. But the more polished your pitch, the more you're going to sound like just a normal human being delivering. And when you go to networking functions or job fairs, that's one of the places you will say it over and over again. So it really does need to just sort of roll off your tongue like it's a natural. They're very useful. They're good kinds of icebreakers, especially when you're meeting new people at, say, a job fair, because you're going to meet an awful lot of people who, like you, are looking for jobs. And again, when you sound really prepared, that leaves people with a good, positive impression. So I've made this a small assignment, but I want you to work on that, and we'll practice it a few times as well. It does, you can write it up in Word and submit it. I will look it over and we'll talk about the words you've chosen, the phrasing, and work on that to make it really a good, solid piece. Okay? So, the purpose of the rest of the class today will be to continue talking about some aspects of your networking and interviewing techniques. Interviews are as much about people looking for reasons to take you off the list as anything else. Especially in highly competitive jobs where they've got a lot of arguably very good applicants. And so what we want to do with interviewing is you want to walk in and make a really good impression when you walk in the door. Your resume and cover letter make an impression. But there's nothing like your physical presence, because they're not hiring a resume, they're hiring that person. So you want to walk in looking professional. And so one of the things that we'll be looking at is interview dress. We've already talked some about body language. We'll talk more about the nonverbal communication that body language is. We'll talk, but when you walk in and make that first impression, you want it to be solidly positive. You want people to say, "Oh, it looks like a person that could work here," just from the way you walk in the door. Your conversation then is what convinces them. So you have a first impression. And then you have, at the end of the interview, the way you leave the interview makes another impression. So the interview you should always leave on a positive note. There's an old set of guidelines about speech making, which of course an interview is not speech, but there's a similar factor here. In speech making, you have two opportunities to really make an impression. One is how you open. The other is how you close. How you open sets the stage for whether people will listen to the body of your speech. If you don't open a speech well, you've lost your audience instantly. It doesn't matter how good your message is. You've lost your audience. If you don't close it well, meaning really give somebody a reason to think about what you've said and to feel that they have really spent their time well listening to you, is how you close out a speech. Well, the same thing with an interview. You have to walk in and make a good impression, or you've lost it right there. You have to provide a lot of good information during the interview, and the interview itself has to go well. But then how you close, which is going to be the questions you ask, and the follow-up. And one of the follow-ups is, I'm really interested in working here. Can I ask you when I'm likely to hear the results of your hiring process? Something like that. Really leave the impression that not only you have made a good impression on them, but the vice versa as well. So then they know that you're interested. You've already said, when can I expect to hear from you? When you ask that question, you're implicitly setting the stage for, if you don't hear from them in whatever time period they give you, to call them back. The other, another good question is, can I provide you any other information about myself and my training and my qualifications? Now, they're usually, an experienced interviewer is going to cover things pretty well, but I will guarantee you that in many cases you won't be working with an experienced, trained interviewer. So that's a good way to jog them into thinking, well, have I missed something? And it's a gentle way to do it. I had a friend who went through, made a real critical error in an interview one time. He told me that he told the interviewer, "Well, you missed asking me a question about," and that insulted the interviewer because the interviewer was embarrassed. He did not get the job. Now that may or may not have been the reason, but he still didn't get the job. So, bear that in mind. So you need to prompt them to think, is there anything I've missed here? Because when you're in an interview, I mean, there's two things that happen. A really good interviewer is going to be talking directly, face to face, not going to be looking down and saying, okay, I've got to check this box and this box. An interviewer who is not really experienced is going to be going through and, let's see, did I get that question? No. And that, so, that's a good way to prompt them. And then it's okay for them to look down and say, oh, yeah, tell me about whatever. When you're asking your questions, one of the questions that you're going to really want to know about is, what's it like to work here? Well, there is only one real answer to that question that an interviewer can give you. This is a great place to work. I love it. Because if they say, oh man, the office politics here are awful, blah, 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 that's not very good.
No.
So that's a question that it can be phrased a little differently. Can be, tell me about a typical working day here at the clinic or at the office. And what can I expect to be doing? That opens up a realm of possibilities. So that's one question to ask, to think about, right there. Another question, as I said before, never ask about salary. That's really something they bring up. So let's not even go there. It's irrelevant if you're not interested in the job or they're not interested in hiring you. It doesn't matter what the salaries are. And if they are, it becomes relevant only when they offer you a position. And perhaps if it's a situation where you get called back for a second interview, there's a time when you may consider the subject of salary because they've already said that they're interested in you. You don't get a second interview if they're not interested in hiring you. At a second interview, you're actually usually going head to head with one or two other people only. Okay. So when that's the case, that's a time when you have to really judge the way things are going. Okay. If the question comes up, what are your salary requirements? That's why I want you to be doing your company research. As much as possible, find out what they pay. Now, with Rise Broadband, they've told you the salary. So that question's irrelevant for you in that particular case. But you want to see what you can find out about what their pay scale is. And sometimes the only way you can do that is especially with companies where there's little online presence. is by looking at Bureau of Labor Statistics information about salaries, salary ranges in your area. And your answer to the question is, I don't know what your pay scale here is, but according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, in this area, the range for my skills is this to this. So you're looking for a salary in that range. And that's the answer to that question. Don't ask for a salary at the top end unless you've got 10, 15 years experience. Okay. Don't ever get trapped into proposing a number, because either you're going to propose, you've got three potential outcomes to that. The number you propose may be way under what they pay or under what they pay. The number you propose may be in the middle of their range, which is why you do the research, or the number you propose may be outside, above their range. If you put out a number above their range, they may just write you off, or they may say to you, no, we don't pay that high. If you put down a number that's below their range, that's what they'll offer you.
That sounds good.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we can do that. It's a great line, you know.
Yeah.
Right then, you know, uh-oh, I went too low. I went too low. And if you're right in the range, then there's little, you know, then they're getting the idea. First off, you have some idea of what the range ought to be. So you've done some research. But really, one of the rules of thumb about the salaries is salary discussion is let them make the first offer. You can always negotiate up from there. And sometimes that works. And I will be honest, when you're first going into a field, you have little room to negotiate. Now, once you've been working for a few years, you've got a lot more room to negotiate. So bear in mind that part of the issue is you look at all of these, look at most of the positions, and for the most part, these positions are going to say, you know, what are we looking for? A medical assistant with 5 years, with minimally 5 years experience. Well, they know that there are plenty of medical assistants with 5 years experience out there. They also know that if they've got 5 years experience, they're probably working in a place they enjoy and aren't necessarily going to want to leave. So that automatically limits the people that come in. I look at those, we want someone with X years experience. That works if you're looking for a top management position. Other than that, that falls, no matter what they say, to my mind, that falls into the nice to have category. And it's the catch-22. Are you familiar with catch-22? Catch-22 was a novel. It was a novel written about World War II by Joseph Heller. It is a comic novel, but it's also, like many comic war novels, a very serious commentary as well. But catch-22 is a situation where, in this particular case, the catch-22 is, I want someone with 5 years experience. Well, I want the job, or you want the job, and you have no experience. So you have no experience, so you have no way of getting the 5 years experience.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're caught. It's a situation where you're caught between two requirements that are impossible to meet. Okay. In Heller's novel, the catch-22 that was there, he wrote about bomber pilots flying out of Italy during World War II. And to be a bomber pilot and to be a bombardier and navigator on one of these things, you had to be a little crazy, right? So if you were crazy, you're not qualified. But if you went and said to someone, I'm crazy, they'd say, your realization that you're crazy makes you sane. So therefore, you're not qualified to be crazy and get out of this duty. That was the whole premise of Catch-22. So if you know you're crazy, and that disqualifies you from a job, but knowing you're crazy makes you sane. So you see so it's the same issue with trying to get experience. You don't have experience, you need to have experience. Every job requires experience. We all know that in the hiring field. And so we're not going to just rule somebody out in most cases because they don't have experience. If it's really a necessity, that's different. As I say, for top management positions, you can't get there without the experience. You don't walk out of MBA school knowing how to manage a Fortune 500 company, even though they're told in MBA school that they can. It's a lie. There's a wonderful story in a book called Reckoning that was written in the 70s, I think, by David Halberstam. It was about the automobile industry in the United States and Japan. And Halberstam compared, he looked at it and said, well, we've got two behemoth organizations in these two countries in the automotive industry. One is GM in the United States, and the other is Toyota in Japan. Mm-hmm. So he went to the number two companies, Ford and Nissan. And he talked about the history at Ford. Ford, no matter what else you thought of Henry Ford, he was quite an innovative man. Mm-hmm. And he invented the production line, basically, among other things. But in the 70s, Ford was declining and facing greater and greater competition. And so a group of people were hired from an academic think tank headed by Robert McNamara, who later became Secretary of Defense under Johnson. And he brought in his team of MBAs, none of whom had worked in the automotive industry. None. And we're going to tell Ford how to build better automobiles. Well, you can imagine how the automotive engineers felt about that. So to have credibility, so if you really want to make an impact at a senior management position, you need that experience. Other than that, everybody starts someplace. Even those guys started someplace. So don't worry about seeing something that says we want someone with 5 years experience. Apply. If you have the other qualifications, they know they're not going to get someone with every single qualification they've got. Or if they are, it's going to be by blind luck. Really, literally. Because the people who have all of those qualifications are already working. By definition, if you've got 5 years experience, you're probably working. Now, if you're a mother who took 3 years off after working for 5 years, you still have the experience, but you're not necessarily working, which doesn't rule you out. But someone who's right out of school has to get started. So be aware that you're going to run into that when you're first starting, and you may have to apply for several positions in order to get that first one. The key to any career is the first job. And it doesn't matter if you've been working since you were 13 years old. And quite frankly, many people have been. I mean, if nothing else, they babysit or, deliver newspapers or, one of those things. And that says something about your work ethic, but it doesn't say anything about your qualifications for any specific job. So again, you need to be ready to negotiate on the issue of, what your salary is going to be, and possibly accept something lower. When I was graduating when I was finishing grad school and looking to get started in the pharmaceutical, well, actually get started working, the pharmaceutical industry just happened to be where I landed. But just starting in that, I knew, that I wasn't going to have a six-figure job right out of school, and so I was willing to take something, much, much lower. Of course, back when I started working, cost of living was lower, a lot of other things. And we moved to North Carolina, where the cost of living was even lower. So you take the job, and it started me on a pathway that did lead to some six-figure jobs. It took 20 years to get there, but that's okay. At that time, I thought I was going to live forever anyway, so it didn't matter. Now I know better, but and I guess intellectually I knew better at the time. But it was the beginning of a long career, rather than later on. So what we're trying. So when you are interviewing, there's some videos and some links here in the course about dress. And we talked about that a little bit. But when you go in, even though, Sarai, you would be going into a position where your uniform on the job would be scrubs. That's not what you interview in. You would dress nicely. Casual professional. Which does not mean you need, tailored suits and that sort of thing. But it does mean that you should take a look at those videos and PowerPoints and other things that we have, and get some hints. But for women, a pantsuit is always a good idea. You can thank Yves Saint Laurent for that. Because before him, if you didn't go in a dress, you were totally unacceptable. But a pantsuit's fine. A nicely fitted skirt suit would be fine too. Good morning, you made it. But the hem should be, when standing, the hem should be slightly below the knees. Okay. It should be, you should have really good choices of colors for you. That's a pretty broad range for most of us. We have a lot of choices, but you wouldn't want to go in tie-dyed shirts. Right? Yeah. In places you might work, that might be the standard dress at the office once you got the job. Yeah. But as I said, you guys going in, you'll work in scrubs, but that's not how you interview. So when you interview, you would go in what we call casual professional. Now, it doesn't mean that you have a lot of, expensive looking clothing, but just nice. Okay, limited jewelry. Your hair should be clean and neat. Length is always optional, but as you know, working on the job, for you'd have to have your hair up on the job. So, but you wouldn't necessarily go that way, go into the interview that way. You'd have it pulled back. Because you're not going in for glamour shots. Right? Right. You're not. So what you want to do is look clean and neat, not too much perfume or cologne or aftershave or any of that stuff. People are very easily offended by those things. Be careful that you don't walk in smelling like you've just smoked a pack of cigarettes. That offends some people too. And in most workplaces today, you can't smoke on the job anyway. So what you want to do is walk in. That first impression when you walk in the door from your appearance is going to be part of exactly that. That and the way you walk in. You need to be confident, not arrogant, but portray a demeanor that says, I'm competent. I'm going to do a great job for you. And just let it go at that. And do that as much as you can with body language, with the nonverbal kinds of communications. As I say, you don't have to go in and say, I'm the greatest thing you're ever going to talk to. But you want them, when you walk out the door, you want them to think, that's the greatest candidate we've got going right now. Let them make that conclusion. Let them know that you're confident, that you're competent, and you're ready to start work. If you're currently working and have to give notice, let them know. That's part of your intro to that question of, when can I expect to hear from you about your decision about hiring for this position? I have to give notice where I work. You know, they're going to like to hear that too, because it says that you are an employee who is trustworthy on the job. You're not going to just walk in and, now maybe you do that if you were working at Walmart as a greeter. Okay, I'm gone. I got another job. Goodbye. Nobody's, that's, but you don't have to say that, because most places will want notice, because they have to replace you. And it's about not burning those bridges too with your former employer. So, Emily, before you got here, I've added another assignment to week 2, and that is to write an elevator pitch. An elevator pitch is a 30-second, maybe maximum 45-second description of who you are, what your qualifications are, and what you're looking for. Now, your book, in terms of talking about elevator pitches, also wants you to to end it with a question. I was telling Cody and Sarai that that's not quite right. That's strictly dependent on the situation you're in. If you're at a networking function, just meeting, greeting people, other networkers, you're going to use the elevator pitch and say, what are you looking for? Or why are you here today? And they're probably going to reflect back to you exactly the same thing you just said in one way or another. But when you go into an interview, one of the first questions is going to be, tell me a little about yourself. That's where your elevator speech comes out. So I want you to write it. We're going to practice it. It has to come out like it's a natural part of conversation, like you're talking with one of your friends over a cup of coffee, instead of sounding like, oh, I have to run tape number 43. And it just comes out like you are doing exactly like it's a recorded tape. One of the things you do is practice, practice, practice. All of these things really involve practice. Very few of us are naturally able to just deliver these things like their conversation. It takes practice. It took me a while to learn how to do that. I can do that now without any trouble at all. But I had to practice. These are things most of us don't come naturally by this. Practice on family, record yourself on your phone, listen to how you sound. Don't sit there and say, oh, my voice is terrible. Oh, blah, blah. Yeah. Turn those negative tropes off and listen. How do I sound? Does it sound natural? Do I have some inflection in my voice, or did I say it like this? Now, that sort of thing. It's easy to do. Yeah. And some people go through life like that. As I was saying with our ophthalmologist in North Carolina, we knew when he turned on the tape because it turned into a lecture.
Mm-hmm.
Well, both of us had had enough lectures in our lives that we could recognize that. And but it is obvious when you're just playing the tape. So what you want is for people to think, well, this person is just really talk to me like, you know, like we're friends. So I want you to do that. Put it into a Word document. Send it to me. You know, we'll go through it. The other thing is, Emily, yesterday I sent annotated copies of resumes and cover letters. My comments are my comments. If there is a reason that what I say doesn't work for you, let's talk about it. I am not the only source of writing resumes or cover letters. I will tell you right now, if you want to, and I would actually encourage this, go to Thane. He used to teach this class. So go to him. He'll be more than happy to work with you. And he's got some good advice. You know, might be a little different from mine, but that doesn't matter. You know, different perspectives. So so that's what's going on. We're going to talk some more about networking and interviewing, and then in about 10 minutes we're going to take a break anyway. So I may be adding a few more extra assignments on topics that I think are important to the process of getting a job and learning how to do that. So expect to see a few extra things added, not necessarily to this week, but in the future, in the next couple of weeks. Week 4 will be the majority of your final evaluation here will come from the mock interview. I'm going to be finding out who I can enlist in my stable of interviewers who's available to do this again. My interviewers they're outside people. They're part of our program advisory committee. Some of them have been helping us in this class for years now. They understand a lot about the process. All of them have been hiring managers in the past. So they understand about all of the issues of resumes and cover letters, and bless you. And we'll give you some feedback. They will be not as tough on you as some interviewers when you actually go out into the field, but they will not let you get away with a bunch of stuff either. And they'll be pretty frank in their evaluation. And what they do at the end of the interview is they fill out an evaluation sheet. And that evaluation sheet talks about, you know, all of the things. How did they look? How did they carry themselves off? And then at the end, they'll give me a rating on 1 to 5 as to whether they think you're hireable. And they're reasonably tough about it. But they also will give you feedback along the way. They'll offer comments on your resume. They have different ideas about these than I do. So they'll pick up on things that are important to them that I am not particularly angsted about. So again, the purpose of that is to prepare you for going out. And the reason we use people outside the school is because, of course, they're not people you know. You know all of us. You know Thane, you know me, you know Katie, you know all of the people here that we might enlist in this effort. Because that's what we did down in Denver. All of our interviewers were faculty. Well, you know, by the time you finish 20 months or 36 months of school, you know the faculty pretty well and they know you. You know, you won't know your interviewer. So I prefer to use outsiders. And we've been doing this for a long time. We know them all pretty well. So they will come in and we'll act, and I'll send you off into a room by yourselves. If it's at all possible, I will set things up and we'll record the interview, and I will send you the link to the recording of your interview. Not everyone won't get to see how you do it, but it's because it's really only for your feedback. But I will send you that recording as well so that you can critique your own interview. And then you'll actually write up a little discussion in week 4. At the end of the process, you'll write up a discussion that won't require responses from everybody, but you'll write up a discussion of your experience with the interview. So the interview itself, I consider to be your final exam. I mean, that's the whole basis of this course. So I consider that. Sarai?
Would that be the 4th week?
Yeah, I'm going to arrange it for then. If there's an issue with that, and there occasionally is, you know, we'll put it off for another week, and we'll just get it set up, and I'll put in a grade change. Okay. So not going to be a problem. But usually we've got a couple of people who can come in. Timing may be an issue on occasion. So we'll want to work with you on that. Now, Cody, you're here most days, all day, so that's not a problem. Emily, I doubt seriously you will have a problem if I have to ask you to come back in the middle of the afternoon. And Sarai will work on your schedule as well, because I know you work. So we'll work around that. I would prefer, quite honestly, if it were Wednesday morning. And then, since you have to go to Tell's class, we'll start with you and just get it done. And as for Tim, when you hear this, Tim, we'll talk about how we can get you here for an interview. These are best done face-to-face. Rarely anymore do you have interviews that are just done online, although that's starting to pick up. Yeah, and phone interviews. I mean, I've had, but almost every phone or video conference interview that I've ever had has been followed up by a face-to-face if they're interested. When they don't schedule the face-to-face, you know, well, that didn't go well. Or dang it. Yeah, or the other alternative is, well, somebody must have really impressed them. Take the positive view. Somebody else really impressed them. But rarely will you do that. And the reason is because you don't work over the phone. Now, if you're a telephone support person, a call center person, then that telephone voice is critical. I don't know if any of you saw the movie The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. Okay, it's great. I mean, it's really a good movie. But one of the sub themes is that these guys, the Best Exotic Marigold Hotel is in Jaipur, India, and it's listed as a place for retirees to go, and a bunch of British retirees go there. And one of them is Judi Dench, is one of the characters, and she goes out and needs money, so she gets a job coaching call center workers. Now, we've all know you call in a call center, you're likely to talk to an Indian. That's reality. And so she actually talks to them about how do you sound over the phone. And it's a really good, it's besides the fact that it's an absolutely hilarious movie. It's really a lesson in telephone, in how these things work and how they can be improved, because we've all had horrible experiences dealing with call centers. People who you can't understand, and when somebody with an Indian accent says, "Hi, my name is Sarah." Yeah, okay. That's your telephone name. What's your real name? I asked that question one time and didn't get an answer.
We can't.
Yeah. That's not why we were talking. You have a problem? So anyway, but so there are places where that makes sense, because you really want people in a call center to be understandable and not talk in 5,000 syllables a second. And which in many societies, people talk so fast, just naturally, that they have to slow down for us English speakers. But you're not likely to find that that's a big probability. Your first jobs, you're probably going to have to go in for a face-to-face interview. Now, questions? Any questions? Well, let's take our first break. It's 9:30. So, excuse me, 9:29. That's good enough. Let's take our first break.
I was going to ask you,
Sure.
for this interview, we're going to dress up.
Okay. I'm not sure. Emily was with Amanda the last time I saw, so I'm not sure when she'll be in. So, questions, comments on any of the stuff we've been talking about this morning?
What is some of the good things to put in the elevators? I know something about, or describe yourself, but.
Well, start with your name, obviously. If you're delivering this in an interview situation, you don't need that line, because they ought to know who you are. But then it would be followed with, I am looking for a position as a, and then you would name, a position that you're interested in. And then my qualifications are, and then just go through them. And then in an interview situation, again, all of these things are sort of situational dependent. But in an interview situation, you would finish there with your qualifications, and perhaps wrap it up with I understand that these qualifications are part of the requirements for the position that I'm interviewing for. If you were at a networking meeting or some sort of job fair, you would be talking to people like yourself, and you'd end it with a question like, why are you here? What kind of positions are you looking for? If you were talking to an actual person that was there representing a company, it would be more a case of what kinds of positions do you have that I might be qualified for? So unless it's obvious, if it were a place that was looking for a network security specialist, and they said that, well, then you don't really have to ask that. But you might follow it up with, how can I find more about your company and see if we're a good fit. Something like that, inviting them to start speaking, because they're really there to find people. You're there to sell yourself, but they're also there to sell the company. Now, some companies are big enough, strong enough that, you know, they're well known. But we have a lot of companies that aren't. You know, if HP is in a place, you know, they're going to figure you know who HP is. But if it's something like Rise Broadband that very few people have heard of, they're going to have to be willing to talk. And the same with a medical practice, if that were what was being, you know, who was being there. A medical practice would be looking probably for a variety of different skills. You know, because you walk in, there are the medical assistants that work with, they usually work with specific doctors or osteopaths. They have phlebotomists. They have medical records specialists. They have all sorts of people in a larger practice. If it's a very small practice, and because I've actually helped people get into externships at single practitioner dermatology clinics. So it's a small one. It's really going to be, they're going to be looking at people who can do a multiplicity of things. So that's when you start asking questions. What are you looking for? What are the positions that you're hiring for that I'm qualified, that I have the qualifications to reach? And it's just, you know, treat it as though it's an interview, because it is sort of a screening interview. Because if the person who's there looks at you and says, well, that's part of their job, is to try and limit the number of people that have to actually be interviewed, because they will get inundated with applicants. So, and the other thing that I suggest you start doing is get your radar out there. Start looking regularly for job fairs, job openings at this stage. You know, you're about to finish with your capstone and go into externship. Well, pretty soon you're going to graduate and be looking for that job. So now's the time to be out there. One of the things that you'll find, we have an awful lot of our medical students, after their externship, end up being offered jobs at the externship site. Sometimes they don't get job offers, but if you've done a good job at an externship site, you can use those as part of your networking. Yeah. Who do you know is hiring right now? Because the community, even though it sounds big, is actually small. And a lot of them know what's going on. So what you want to do with your externship site, especially, is treat it as though you're basically doing an on-the-job interview, a month-long or 2-month-long interview. Mm-hmm. And we find that a lot of people do get offers. Now, sometimes they're not offers they want. We used to regularly, because down in Denver, our nighttime students, all basically their externships were all in pharmacies, because that's the only organization that's open at night. And a lot of times these students, we'd be real honest with them. Most of them did not want to work in a pharmacy. And we'd say, well, you know, you don't have much of a choice. You have to do an externship, and we don't have anything else. The freestanding ERs, the 24-hour ERs, hospitals, they're open 24 hours a day. They won't take externs for the most part. They have to be specialty hospitals. And the reason they don't take externs is because they don't have the time to supervise an extern. So we put them in the pharmacies, and they would regularly be offered positions. And some of them even discovered that they actually liked working in pharmacies. But for the most part, they weren't interested. So, that's a little different. But our daytime students often would get offered positions. And we had a group of companies that we worked with that were expanding. One of the medical records organizations used to hire all of our grads that externed with them because they needed people for billing and coding and electronic health records. So, it might be a very easy process for you. But if not, remember that your externship is also experience. And so when you get finished with that externship, it goes on your resume as an externship. And an externship is different than a job in that it's okay if it only lasted 1 month or 2 months. Yeah, okay. Oh, it's an externship. Okay. Okay, so it was a time limited assignment. So, but put that down there because you'll really, they'll work you pretty well and they'll train you a lot. We've had some people here, and I say that hospitals don't do it, but we had someone whose externship was in Children's Hospital. Pardon?
No.
Yeah, no. Yeah. And they liked her. So, and that's what she wanted. But it's unusual, and she's a night student, so it's unusual for us to find something like that for a night student. But whatever you can do, you want to treat that as though it's the job of a lifetime, and really do a good job because those are also good references. When you leave those positions, if they haven't offered you a job, you ask if you can use them as a reference. And those references are valuable, very valuable, because they've seen you at work when you just walked out and you actually knew what you were doing. So it's worth doing. It's worth keeping in mind. So do you have any idea yet where you might extern? Because that's coming up real soon.
I do not.
Do you have preferences?
I don't think I have any preferences. I definitely don't want a super busy place right away. But I mind it, but I prefer not to.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think the women's clinic is constantly busy. I feel like compared to something else at a family practice.
Mm-hmm. Well, with a family practice, you're likely to be doing very much similar things, taking histories, asking questions, follow-up questions from previous visits, maybe doing a few CLIA wave tests, like you did in hematology and microbiology, just various standard things, not a whole lot. But you'll probably be busy all day. They'll probably have you, when you go home from working there, you'll be tired. Yeah. But that's okay. A place like the women's clinic, which is just really, because you have such a wide variety of clientele, people with insurance, you have emergencies, you have Medicare, Medicaid, everything there. It'd be a great experience, I'm sure, because you do a lot of different stuff. But we've, all of it is dependent on where you are. So, but usually we try to work. Thane works through getting, a lot of those arrangements. So you may want to talk again with Tell about how you get those externships set up. Because it can take, and you need to do that now because it can take a little while. So, and I would talk with Thane about it. And he's here today, I think. Yeah. Yeah, I saw the light in his office on, so, but that doesn't mean he's here because it's a pass through for us to get into the education department, and so if he's not in the office, we walk through. Okay, so where the other thing you when you're thinking about networking, remember I said that professional societies are a good source of networking. All professional societies have local chapters. So there are, as I said, there are, for instance, several professional societies for medical assistants. So what you probably want to do is start investigating that as well. Go to a meeting. If there's a meeting scheduled, just go to a meeting and meet people, because they will know a lot about what's going on in their offices, about who's hiring. So it's another way of getting information. Plus, if you can meet people and get to know people and have them help you get into an interview, your chances of being hired go way up. Simply because when you have a contact, then you have and someone who's willing to say, yes, we'd like to interview this person. Again, you walk in with a leg up on people who just throw their resume over the transom. So you may want to start looking at those as well. Most of these organizations will, if you talk to them, will let you come to a meeting and just find out about the organization, the local chapter. Now, they don't have meetings every single week, so that is usually there's a at best quarterly get together, but nonetheless, that's a good way to get to meet people in field as well. So that's one form of networking. Social media networking. Putting aside all the junk going on now with Facebook and others, they are excellent ways of letting people know you're available, especially if you are on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is something you should be on. You should go ahead and get a LinkedIn profile. It doesn't cost anything. And it is a way of getting the word out there that you are looking for a position, that you have certain qualifications, and you just don't know when these things will pay off. There are pros and cons to all of these. LinkedIn as a source of information can be good, but what it really boils down to is that you don't lose anything by having your name out there, having a profile of yourself out there in these social media. If you're using the social media for purposes of networking, then you're not going to do silly things, make trivial, silly posts. What you're going to do is have a professional appearance in these, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn or Instagram or Pinterest or whatever, all the, whatever the social media of the week happens to be. You will maintain a presence. Do I think you need to be on all of them? The answer to that is absolutely no. You don't want to be spending a whole lot of time on social media. You have better things to do. Some of the other forms of networking, like looking for job fairs. The other thing that you really want to do is regularly see what job fairs are going on, because there seems to be almost a season for them. And quite frankly, this time of year, when the four-year institutions are getting ready to graduate, that's when the job fairs are going. So now's a good time to be looking at those and go to them. When you go to a job fair, and I've said this before, have a business card. Just name, qualifications, telephone number, email. Nothing big. You don't need to worry about it. People who put huge amounts of information on their business cards, the business cards end up just being ignored because you can't find the information you need. Again, make it easy. You're going to be dealing with people of all age groups, and you get into dealing with people in my age, we don't like seeing a bunch of cluttered up information that we have to search for. It doesn't matter how artistic. Now, met a guy this weekend, very, very nice young man, young being a relative term, of course, but very nice young man who is a tattoo artist. Now, his business card, if he had a sample of his work, drawn out on one side, that would be very appropriate. We have a friend we've known for many, many, many years who is a tattoo artist in the Seattle area. And she is so good. She is my primary standard. When I see a tattoo, I say, how does that compare to Heidi's work? And most people fall short, to be honest. But in her case, that's her business card is a picture of some of her fine artwork. She actually has her college degree was in fine arts. And she's a tremendous visual artist. But she got interested in tattooing. So, and that's what she's doing. And she designed some amazing things. So it's appropriate there. But if you don't have something like that, don't bother, just to have name, the old name, rank, and serial number, right? Name, qualifications, email, phone number. Nothing else. Not your Facebook account, not Twitter, not LinkedIn, or any of that. Again, professional. And, if possible, a professional looking email. Okay. We talked about that the first day of class. So what we want to do is look at what we are projecting. And a simple business card has, if you are actually working someplace, you don't want to give your business card in a networking, in a job search kind of situation. You might, if you're just talking to people. I used to carry at least 2 different business cards with me. I'd have my job business card, and then I'd have my personal business card. So we used to call those calling cards. Business cards came out of what was known as the calling card. When you especially in Victorian England, if you went to some place to meet people, you would present a calling card at the door as to who you were. And the calling card had your name on it. That was basically it. They didn't have telephones and emails then. So that was it. And that's how the business card came about, was from the calling card concept. And so what you want is a calling card, essentially. This is who I am. Always going to a networking event, carry copies of your resume. You don't need cover letters or any of that, just resume. And if you meet somebody that's interested and they ask for it, you want to be able to pull it out and hand it to them. You don't want to say, I'll send it to you by email. They may request it, but you still want to give them a hard copy. And the reason you want to is you don't want to say, well, I'll send you an email and you can print it out. It's an extra step. They won't do it. They won't do it. Yeah. Which is, again, a generalization. Some will, but most won't. So carry that always. You once we get the resume really in good shape, carry it with you everywhere. When you go off to your externship, be prepared to hand them your resume. They may or may not want it. They might even request it before you start. But be prepared. Be prepared. So what you want is networking online is different from networking functions and job fairs. You're not going to post your resume on Facebook or LinkedIn. You have a profile in LinkedIn where you can really quickly summarize what is your degree, what's your education, what are your qualifications, your certifications, and a little bit about where you are currently working and possibly previous positions. But you have a limited amount of space for that. You don't write a narrative about how much you love your dog. You know, I've seen people do that. Okay, if you want to be a dog groomer, great. But if you're looking for a job in IT, nobody cares if you love your dog. Okay, so when you're doing your profile, pardon?
Unless it's one of those like computer, not computer, robot.
Yeah. Yep. But what we want is that profile needs to be short and sweet. Okay. You don't have a lot of stuff on there. I've had people try to write paragraphs about their experience. People won't read it. I mean, you have to remember that you're trying to attract an audience that's interested, but is going to be seeing a whole lot of applications and a lot of people. And what you want is something that someone can scan quickly. A few key words. Certified in. That's a great phrase. Or certified as. An MA. Electronic health records. Patient care provider. Phlebotomist. Whatever. But certified in the medical area, you know, what do you see when you see a doctor described? Board certified surgeon, board certified, ENT specialist. Okay, we're looking for those phrases or those key words. They see that and then they say, oh, okay, what are they certified? Okay, we're going to assume, by the way, when you're on LinkedIn, as a medical person, they're going to assume that you're certified in CPR. So it's iffy whether you should bother even to put it down. Certified. It does go on your resume. It does go in your cover letter. But on a LinkedIn profile or something like that, there are things we're going to assume about our medical people, that they are that they'll have certain things, that they'll have the CPR and first aid. They'll have perhaps they'll have been through bloodborne pathogens training. You know, we're going to make those assumptions. But you can't assume that just because they're seeking a medical job, they're certified as MAs or as phlebotomists or anything else. So you want to make sure that that's there. And usually there's a section in the LinkedIn profile that says, I'm going to make a true confessions here. I haven't updated my LinkedIn profile in probably 10 years. But there's a section in there that says something about what your career goals are or what it is you want to do. Make sure that that's there. So, but again, the object is to keep things as concise and as compact as possible, so that someone can just quickly scan if they happen to run into your profile. LinkedIn over the years has come and gone, and I think it's back on something that is a little more important now. But I'm not sure. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say about that particular one. Other social networking, social media. Is best if you keep it innocuous. Facebook, Twitter, etc. Don't say things that are controversial or could be. Don't make political references; those offend people. You're going to have, when you make any sort of political statement, you've got two sets of reactions. Yeah, right on, and oh, you're an idiot. And so it's best if neither one of those is useful. So it's best if you avoid making a lot of those kinds of posts in those social media, because they will look. Nowadays, they definitely look at Facebook, they definitely look at Twitter, and they may continue to see, where else you appear. And how do they know where you appear? They simply enter your name into a search engine.
Are they allowed to search your email?
Theoretically, your emails are not searchable. Practically speaking, if someone has the skills, they can see some things. Companies monitor your emails on their internal email system, so that when you go to work for, say the women's clinic, they probably have an email.
A separate email.
Yeah, right. And they monitor. So whenever you're using a company email, keep it strictly business. One of the nice things about cell phones is I can have my personal email on my cell phone, send my wife a note or a message, or my friends a message, and theoretically nobody can see that. Although, if you are using, if you're using a company phone, you want to be careful about that. But also, if you are using the company's internet connection, you want to be careful about what you do, because it is really amazing what can be monitored. Now, we all know that the government, meaning things like groups like the National Security Agency and others, are maintaining a surveillance over our emails and everything else. There's no way to avoid that. One of the reasons that I've always tried to keep even my emails fairly innocuous is that I hope I bore anybody at the government who reads it to tears.
Oh, they're already bored.
Yeah.
They read over so many emails.
And that's why they do it all through some sort of smart system that looks for keywords. So there's nothing, but companies have fired people for misuse of their internal email system. Your company email is for business only, and you'll sign a contract that says they have the right to monitor.
You use for them.
Pardon?
If you use their equipment, like computer
computers or whatever, they have the right to search
Yeah.
whatever.
And people, it amazes me that people are so stupid they'll use company computers for pornography.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good way to get fired in a hurry. Yeah. And quite frankly, if you're using a company computer for that, arguably you should be.
Apparently you're not doing your job.
You're not doing your job. But it does amaze me. This whole thing with emails and private servers and everything, the whole Hillary Clinton thing in the last election. I have no idea how much of that's real and how much of it's not, but it's perception too. But yeah, company resources are to be used for the company's business. So when I was working, my email here at school, my only connection with my own email is that I spend a lot of time looking for useful information in classes, and I'll forward it to this email, so that I'm getting what I want. But I don't use it. My wife and I communicate when we communicate by email. Mostly we communicate by text. But by email, it's always going to my Gmail account. So, collegeamerica.edu is for school business. And, and the school has every right to monitor that. I'm sure they do. I would be stunned if they didn't. And what they'll find is business. There's a bunch of stuff. I mean, I've gotten, as a result of some relationships we had with vendors and stuff, I get a lot of crap from vendors, which I mostly just delete now. But nonetheless, you will find that. So, and I've always gone by the motto, I've said this before, never put anything in an email that you would rather no one else know.
It's not a diary like you have a hard copy.
Yeah, right.
Once it's on the email, the world could see it.
Yeah, that's right. The entire world can see it. And don't depend on your friends not to blab.
Oh no, never.
Not to say that your friends are going to deliberately say, "Oh, guess what Cody just wrote," but it might just inadvertently come out.
It might make them mad one day or whatever. They may just go,
I can
did
fix
read
you.
this about you.
Yeah, I can fix you. Yeah. So, but again, that's just professionalism. But people don't seem to have a lot of barriers about that. But that's why we have multiple emails. I understand the desire not to have too many email accounts. At one point, I was involved doing some work with about 4 different companies. So I had 4 different email accounts, one with each company, plus my personal email account, plus an email account I have always used, my first one, my AOL account, which is now all the junk mail can go their account. So I had very hard to keep track. I'm glad I don't have that anymore. But it's very hard to keep track of all that. So again, just common sense. So going back to, you need to leave. So do you have any other questions or anything before you take off?
No, not right now.
Okay. Well, you can send any questions to me. When you take a look at my comments on your cover letter and resume, if you have any questions, just email me. I know you'll be out of town, so I will respond. So,
Okay.
and have fun.
Yep.
Have fun.
Thank you.
So, Emily, questions? Sorry?
I said I live upset stuff, but sorry.
Oh, okay. I wondered, running in and out.
It
No, I don't need you.
happens.
Yep, it happens to everybody. So it is now 10:30. Time to take another break. And when we come back from the break, I want you to work on your company research project for this week. And start thinking about your elevator pitch. We'll all be here. If you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them. So, bye-bye, Sarai. Safe trip.
Thank you.
So we'll do that. So I'm going to pause the recording again. Okay, let's now talk about just sort of a summary of this week. The assignment and the and assessment we've talked about. Both of those are writing, and I've gotten some submitted already. That's great. The elevator pitch is a new one. Go ahead and work on that. Don't just throw something together and send it. Think about it for a day or two. Think about how you want it to read. What do you want to say about yourself? Then just go ahead and send it, and we'll talk about it next week. The next week is going to be another phase of this. We'll go over we'll look over your company reports, and I'll take a look and see if they're, we'll look at them and talk about the information in them, and maybe the difficulties you've had getting some of that information. Because sometimes it's harder. Next week's discussion is going to be about social media presence. I will make a posting before it's actually online. So for right now, I'd like to leave that sort of offline because I want to actually go through that exercise myself and point out some of the pitfalls that come with it. The assignment for next week is the master application. And there is a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet format for that. And again, a master application, we've given you a format and or a template. And although I'm not necessarily a giant fan of templates, this one is really, the template really is a guideline. Many times when we have a job application that we have to fill out, we'll go into an interview, they'll have seen our resume, and they'll want us to fill out their job application. And traditionally, job applications, when you're talking about employment history, who's the supervisor, blah, 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 what's the address of the company, the detailed address, the street address. Whereas on your resume, you're going to say, I worked for this company in Fort Collins, Colorado. What they're going to want is more information about contacting the company. They may very well contact the company and just ask for confirmation that you worked, because so many people, unfortunately, have filled out job resumes and job applications and falsified their work record. A lot of companies will simply verify your employment. They won't give any further information. And that's because if they have, if they provide information that's used to not hire you, companies have been sued for that. And it's not unusual for them to actually lose those lawsuits. You'd think, okay, if you've had a bad review and the company says you've had a bad review, how can, that's telling the truth. Why is that a litigable issue? But lawyers will find a way. So a lot of times they won't do that. Um, the they will, however, confirm that you work. They'll also want to know your supervisor. And sometimes they will contact the supervisor. And supervisors often, even though companies warn them not to be careful what they say to somebody outside the company, supervisors, especially if they like you, are very likely to say, oh yeah, well, I really enjoyed working with Cody. He did a great job. He was well trained. He worked hard, blah, blah, blah. They're usually trained not to say much more than that. The one thing that does happen is that when, and people have been again successfully sued for this, they don't want you to say anything negative. There are lots of ways, however, that a former supervisor or coworker can say something negative that in reality they can, that really doesn't give anybody a handle to do anything about. I'll give you an example. This comes out of Denmark, and it comes from my daughter's father-in-law. In Denmark, they have some very, very strict rules about employment and about everything else. And one of those rules is this issue of what you can say in a letter of recommendation. And Martin had a guy working in their company who literally was the prototypical sort of government type worker. Would go in the morning, come in, roughly on time, spend the first 15 minutes getting his cup of coffee, would never accomplish anything, would never do anything, and then would head home exactly on time. And it's very hard to fire people in Denmark. Finally, they got him out of the company. And he applied for a job someplace else and used, the job history included this company that Martin was with. And one of the people there was asked to write a letter of recommendation. So this person thought about it and said, well, I can't say this guy's a real doofus. He'll never do a thing. He said, so he wrote this letter and they said, if you hire this guy, you'll be really lucky to have him work for you. Now, the meaning for that was not lost on the other company.
Yeah.
You will be lucky to have him work. That means he didn't work. So, there are ways of doing that. And you read that on its face, it's complimentary.
Mm-hmm.
But the subtext, and there's other ways, there's lots of ways to put in subtext. The subtext, of course, was that he doesn't do a thing. So there are ways that can happen. So what you want to do is be careful with letters of recommendation. Obviously, if you ask for a letter of recommendation, you're going to ask for one from someone that you think will write you a good one, a truthfully good one. And I worked when I worked on a job when I was in the Army. I was working in one of their research posts in Maryland, and we had a guy there had a PhD from I think Johns Hopkins. I mean, not a schlock university. We called him the hall monitor because he would come in every morning, and that's what he'd do. He'd go get his cup of coffee, and all you do is see him going up and down the hallway all day long drinking his coffee. He never did a lick of work. But he was working for the government, and
That's
you talk about being a place that's hard to get fired from, unless you're a political appointee, of course, is the government.
especially if you're hired, you get paid a lot.
Yeah, he was like a GS-18.
Yeah, takes an act of Congress too.
Yeah. So he got away with it, and we laughed at him. And of course, we were all just in the Army, so we didn't care. It wasn't our beef. But My sister-in-law worked for the Public Health Service. She worked for CMMS, and she was the project leader in the designing of the new ICD-10 codes for medical coding. And she had a guy working for her who literally did nothing. And it took her 4 years to get him fired. And then he sued and was reinstated. And she said, well, I just spent 4 years trying to get this guy who did absolutely nothing kicked out. And he's right back there. I will never do that again. A very effective tool for making certain that people don't even try. So, and fortunately in the private sector, they don't have that problem. And in Colorado, a right to work state, which I love that title, people can fire you at any time, for any reason, or for no reason at all. You might walk in at one day and there's a scuff on your shoe and they're in a bad mood and they might fire you for that. You have no appeal. The other side of that is you can also quit at any time for any reason. Yeah, so it's a two-way street. But it's mostly seen as an advance on this. But the discussion here for social media involves actually searching for yourself. Well, I'll post what I learned about me. And some of it's surprising, some of it's not. I found out I was the president of Louis Vuitton, the men's products company, and that I live in France.
Nice.
Where's the money?
Yep.
Where's my money?
Yeah, I'd like to have that paycheck. I wouldn't mind living in France either.
Yep.
Paris is a nice city. I like it. But the next thing, the master application really is something that you really need to have in your portfolio. For the purposes of this, again, I talked about this before, but this is going to be stored online. It's going to be in your system here. For the purposes of this class, put nothing personal. No social security numbers, no passport numbers, driver's license numbers, nothing that someone could hack into and use to steal your identity. But in your personal copy, you want all that. But that's where you put all the extra information that you would not ever put on a resume because there just isn't enough room. And it's a lot of details. It's where you have the records of all of your employment, all of your addresses, et cetera, that you've had, and just keep it. It's not a bad thing. Cody, you already have most of that. Mm-hmm. I know. Emily, this might be a time for you to start creating it and just put it on your bucket list to keep it up to date at all times.
I do.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right. I did that.
Yeah.
How long did I live here? Oh, yep, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I was a year. Wow.
It took me a long time trying to get that information when I first filled it out. So see, I was there for years.
Hey, Paul.
Quick announcement.
Yeah, quick.
We have a video game tournament at 1:30 over in LC5. Also 2:30, we're starting Hunt for Red October in the theater. Because we're showing video games about nuclear war, I've also got the most gentle video game ever made. It's called Flower. And you're the wind and you're flying through all these cool canyons and stuff, so you can come check that out too.
Oh, great. Thanks, Paul. So we'll be working on that. The assessment I will get prepared and online for next week as well. And it will reflect back to that document on soft and transferable skills. Okay, and to some extent, I'll also have some suggestions for some of the media. Go into the course media and look at some of the information there. Continue your looking at the various videos and stuff. Many of them don't appear to be in the right place considering the way I'm teaching this class, but all of them are useful. And hopefully we can get this class rearranged a little bit to where everything will match up in the future. As I said, we're still struggling with how we're going to structure all these things. So we're working at it. We're working at it.
It will take a few months.
Yeah, it will. It will. There'll be some birthing pains involved in this.
Trial and error.
Yeah,
See how.
and we'll get it worked out. It'll turn into something really useful. And we're trying to keep it useful along the way, because I think, as I told one of my interviewers, when I was first teaching this class, I was a little leery about it because I'd never taught it before. But I've come to really enjoy the process of watching, of helping, and watching the evolution of your documentation and your preparation. So I think it's worthwhile. So, questions, comments? Okay. So, Tim, when you read this, send me or when you watch this video, send me an email, and the term I'd like to have you put into that is Mindanao, Mindinao will be the word for the week, or the word for the day. So I'm going to shut this recording off now and close out the meeting.